Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Marcus. I'm 34, and I remember the exact second Echo Canyon went quiet enough to hear my fear. It was 3 days into what should have been a peaceful week-long RV trip through Utah's backcountry, parked at a dispersed camping spot 15 miles down a dirt road from the nearest highway. The canyon walls rose like cathedral spires around our small clearing, red sandstone painted gold by the setting sun. Sarah had wanted to come here after her divorce, said she needed somewhere vast enough to swallow her pain. I'd suggested we bring Jake along, my old college roommate who'd been fighting his own demons since losing his job. The three of us in my 28-foot Winnebago, seeking solitude in one of the most remote corners of southeastern Utah. The lightning storm had rolled in without warning the night before, turning the desert sky electric blue-white for hours. We'd huddled inside the RV, playing cards by LED lantern light while thunder echoed off the canyon walls like gunshots in a cathedral. When morning came, the air smelled scrubbed clean, charged with an energy that made the hair on our arms stand up. That's when we noticed the voices. At first, we thought it was other campers. Echo Canyon was popular with off-grid enthusiasts, and sound carried strangely in the desert. But these voices weren't coming from any direction we could pinpoint. They seemed to drift from the rocks themselves, fragments of conversation that sounded almost familiar. Sarah heard her ex-husband calling her name. Jake swore he recognized his dead mother's laugh. I heard my own voice, clear as day, saying words I'd never spoken. "It's just echo effects," I told them that first morning, trying to sound confident while my coffee mug trembled in my hands. Sound bounces weird in canyons, probably picking up radio transmissions or something. But radios don't explain what happened to Jake. We'd been here 4 days when he disappeared. One moment he was helping me check the RV's solar panels after another night of strange atmospheric disturbances. The next, he was gone. Sarah and I searched for 6 hours, calling his name until our throats were raw, following his footprints until they simply ended at a flat stretch of sandstone near the canyon mouth. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing, just his baseball cap sitting on a rock like someone had placed it there deliberately. He came back at sunset, walking out of the same area where his tracks had vanished. But something was wrong with his smile. Jake had always been serious, even in college. Thoughtful, measured, the kind of guy who'd think for 30 seconds before answering a simple question. This version of Jake smiled constantly, his lips stretched too wide, eyes too bright. He wouldn't stop grinning, even when we peppered him with questions about where he'd been. "Just exploring," he said, that unnatural smile never wavering. "Beautiful country out here. Really makes you think about things differently." The way he said "differently" made my skin crawl. Sarah noticed it first, how Jake's smile never reached his eyes, how he'd tilt his head when we spoke like he was translating our words from a foreign language. He'd forgotten things too. Small things at first. He asked Sarah what her job was, though he'd been asking about her real estate license all week. He couldn't remember the name of our favorite bar from college, the place where we'd spent countless Thursday nights arguing about everything from baseball to philosophy. "I guess being lost scrambled my brain a little," he said, that horrible smile fixed in place. "But I'm fine now. Better than fine, actually. I feel renewed." The word renewed dripped from his mouth like honey poisoned with arsenic. That night, I lay in the RV's cramped bedroom listening to Jake and Sarah talk in the dinette area. Their voices carried clearly through the thin walls, but something was off about the conversation. Jake's responses came too quickly, like he knew what Sarah was going to say before she said it. And his laugh. God, his laugh had changed. It was still Jake's voice, technically, but the rhythm was wrong, like someone playing a recording at the wrong speed. I must have dozed off, because I woke to silence. Not the natural quiet of the desert, but something heavier, more absolute. Even the ever-present whisper of wind through the canyon had stopped. I checked my phone. 3:17 a.m. No signal as usual, but the timestamp glowed eerily in the darkness. That's when I heard it. Jake's voice, but not from inside the RV. It was coming from outside, somewhere in the darkness beyond our camp. He was talking to someone, his words carrying clearly in the dead air. "She's starting to suspect," he was saying. "And Marcus remembers too much." A second voice responded, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like static shaped into syllables, white noise trying to pretend it was human speech. "No," Jake's voice continued. "It's better this way. Let them think they're safe for now. Fear makes the meat tender." My blood turned to ice water. I pressed my ear against the RV's wall, straining to hear more, but the conversation had stopped. After what felt like hours, I heard the soft snick of the RV's door opening, footsteps in the gravel, the creak of Jake settling into his bunk. In the morning, I confronted him. "Where were you last night?" I asked while Sarah was outside checking the weather radio. Jake's perpetual smile widened. "Sleeping, same as you. Bad dreams. I heard you talking to someone. Must have been sleep talking. Sorry if I kept you up." He paused, head tilting in that unnerving way. "You know, Marcus, you've been looking tired lately. Maybe you should see a doctor when we get back to civilization. Sometimes stress can cause auditory hallucinations." The casual way he said auditory hallucinations made my hands shake. This wasn't Jake. Jake barely knew medical terminology beyond headache and hangover. But something wearing his face knew exactly which words would plant seeds of doubt in my mind. Sarah came back inside, shaking her head. "Radio's completely dead. Not even static. It's like something's jamming all the frequencies. Electronics go wonky in the desert," Jake said smoothly. "All that mineral content in the rocks creates interference patterns." Another phrase Jake would never use. I watched Sarah nod and accept this explanation, while my dread deepened. Whatever was wearing my friend's face was learning, adapting, becoming more convincing with each passing hour. I started watching Jake more carefully. He ate the same foods, knew all the same stories, could recall shared memories with perfect accuracy. But little things were wrong. He held his fork differently, chewed with the wrong side of his mouth, blinked in a rhythm that didn't match his breathing. Most disturbing of all, he never seemed to sleep. I'd lie awake listening, and Jake's breathing never settled into the deep, slow rhythm of REM sleep. It remained steady, controlled, like something consciously maintaining the illusion of rest. On the 5th day, Sarah started having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming, sheets soaked with sweat, talking about dreams where Jake was standing over her bed with that horrible smile, his mouth opening to reveal rows of teeth that belonged in a shark's jaw. In her dreams, he'd whisper things in languages that predated human speech, promises of transformation and renewal that made her skin feel like it was crawling with insects. "It's just stress," Jake said when Sarah described the dreams. "Being isolated like this, it plays tricks on the mind. Maybe we should head back to town." But when Sarah agreed, eager to escape whatever psychological pressure was building in the canyon, Jake found excuses to delay. The alternator needed checking. He'd spotted a leak in one of the tires. The dirt road might be too muddy after yesterday's brief shower. Each excuse was reasonable, delivered with that maddening smile, but I could see the pattern. Whatever was wearing Jake's face didn't want to leave Echo Canyon. That afternoon, while Jake was napping in his bunk, I pulled Sarah aside. "We need to leave," I whispered. "Right now, while he's asleep." "What are you talking about?" "That's not Jake." Sarah stared at me like I'd suggested we sacrifice a goat. "Marcus, what the hell?" "Listen to me." I grabbed her shoulders, probably too tightly, but I needed her to understand. "Jake's been acting strange since he came back, right? The smile, the way he talks, how he knows things he shouldn't know. He was lost for 6 hours in the desert. People get disoriented. People don't learn medical terminology overnight. People don't forget their best friend's mother's name. And people definitely don't have conversations in the middle of the night about making meat tender." Sarah's face went pale. "What did you just say?" "I heard him talking to someone last night. He said fear makes the meat tender. Sarah, whatever came back wearing Jake's face, it's not him. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then her eyes filled with tears. I thought I was going crazy, she whispered. He knew things about David, my ex-husband, that I never told anyone. Things that happened in our bedroom, private conversations. How could Jake know that unless what's inside him can access more than just Jake's memories? We both turned toward the RV's rear bedroom, where the thing that looked like Jake was supposedly sleeping. No sound came from that direction, not even breathing. The silence felt predatory, like a cat waiting outside a mouse hole. "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "We leave. Now. Quietly." "What about Jake? The real Jake?" I thought about the way his footprints had simply ended on the sandstone, how his baseball cap had been placed so carefully on that rock. I don't think the real Jake is coming back. We moved with agonizing care, gathering only essential supplies. Car keys, Sarah's purse, a bottle of water. I disconnected the RV's battery the night before during my routine maintenance check, ensuring our exit wouldn't be announced by the vehicle's electronic systems. We crept toward the driver's compartment, every footstep sounding like thunder in the silence. I was sliding the key into the ignition when Jake's voice drifted from the bedroom. "Going somewhere?" We froze. The voice was still Jake's, but the intonation was wrong, like an actor who'd learned his lines phonetically without understanding the language. "Just checking the engine," I called back, my voice cracking. "That's thoughtful of you, Marcus. But, you know, the engine's going to have a hard time starting without this." I looked down. The key wasn't in my hand anymore. Somehow, impossibly, it was gone. Jake appeared in the doorway separating the living area from the bedroom, still wearing that ghastly smile. He held up my keys, jingling them like a cat toy. "You two really should be more careful with your belongings. This is a dangerous place. Easy to lose things out here. Easy to lose yourself." "Give me the keys, Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake?" The thing tilted its head. "Jake had to go away, Marcus. He volunteered, actually. Very generous of him. But don't worry, I'm taking good care of his memories. Would you like me to share one with you?" Without waiting for an answer, it spoke in perfect imitation of Jake's voice. "Remember sophomore year, when you got so drunk you pissed yourself at the Delta Chi party? Jake cleaned you up, got you home, never told anyone. Such a good friend. Loyal, trusting. That trust made it so much easier to invite him in." My stomach lurched. Those were Jake's exact words from a conversation we'd had years ago, his exact tone of affectionate embarrassment. But hearing them from this thing's mouth felt like desecration. "What are you?" Sarah whispered. The smile widened impossibly, stretching Jake's features beyond human anatomy. "I'm what the lightning brought down from the sky. What your people used to call skinwalker, before you forgot how to see. Your friend made such a perfect vessel. All that pain, all that emptiness just waiting to be filled." It took a step closer, and I noticed its feet weren't quite touching the RV's floor. It was hovering, just barely, Jake's body suspended by whatever was wearing it. But Jake was just practice. "Sarah, your grief is so much richer, so much more complex. Divorce, abandonment, the slow death of dreams deferred. Marcus, your guilt is exquisite. All those friends you've failed, all those promises you've broken. You too will make such beautiful homes." The thing that had been Jake raised its hand, and I saw that its fingernails had grown into claws. Not gradually, but all at once, as if the illusion was finally dropping away. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from its mount beside the driver's seat and sprayed it full in the creature's face. It shrieked. Not with Jake's voice, but with the sound of feedback from a broken radio. The white chemical cloud filled the RV's interior, and I grabbed Sarah's hand. "Run!" We burst through the RV's door into the desert evening. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls blood red, and shadows pooled in every crevice like spilled ink. I could hear the thing behind us, no longer bothering to maintain Jake's voice. It was making sounds like tearing metal, like wind through broken glass. "The car!" Sarah gasped, pointing toward my Honda Pilot parked beside the RV. But as we reached it, I remembered the keys were still in the creature's possession. I tried the door anyway. Locked. Of course, the thing that had been Jake emerged from the RV, Jake's body moving with predatory grace that belonged to a hunting cat, not a human being. Its eyes reflected the dying light like mirrors, and when it smiled I could see that Jake's teeth had been replaced with triangular shards of what looked like obsidian. "Where are you going to run?" it asked conversationally. "We're 15 miles from the nearest road. The desert is full of things that hunt in the dark. At least with me, the pain will be brief." Behind it, the RV's windows began to glow with an eerie blue light, the same color as the lightning that had filled the sky 3 nights ago. More shapes moved inside that light, vague, shifting forms that hurt to look at directly. "You brought friends," I said. The storm was an invitation. We've been waiting so long for someone to answer. It cocked Jake's head. "Your species used to understand. You'd leave offerings, perform rituals, maintain the boundaries. But you forgot the old ways, stopped believing in anything except your own cleverness. So we had to adapt. Learn to speak your languages, wear your faces." Sarah grabbed my arm. "There," she whispered, pointing toward a narrow gap between 2 of the canyon's towering walls. "That leads back toward the main road." It was our only chance. The gap was too narrow for the RV, too narrow for anything larger than a human being. If we could reach it— "Run," I told her. We sprinted across the desert floor, loose rocks sliding under our feet, thorny desert plants tearing at our clothes. Behind us, the creature let out another of those radio-static shrieks, and I heard multiple sets of footsteps giving chase. Whatever had been summoned by the storm, there were more of them now. The gap between the canyon walls was 50 yards away, 40, 30. Something slammed into my back, driving me face first into the gravel. Claws raked across my shoulder blades, shredding my shirt and the skin beneath. I rolled over to see Jake's face inches from mine, but the eyes were completely black now, reflecting nothing. "The old ones are hungry," it whispered. "They've been sleeping in the spaces between lightning and thunder, dreaming of the taste of fear. You're going to help us wake them up." Sarah's scream echoed off the canyon walls. I turned to see another figure holding her. A perfect copy of Sarah herself, down to the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident. But this duplicate's movements were wrong, jerky, like a marionette operated by someone who'd never seen a human walk. "Fascinating species," the Sarah thing said in Sarah's voice. "So much potential for terror. So many ways to break a mind while keeping the body functional." The real Sarah was fighting, clawing at her doppelganger's grip, but the creature was impossibly strong. Where its fingers touched her arms, her skin began to darken and split, as if it was burning her from the inside out. I still had the car keys. No, wait. The creature had taken them. But I had something else. My pocket knife, a cheap gas station special I'd bought for opening packages. I fumbled it open and drove the blade into the Jake thing's wrist. It released me with another electronic shriek, and I rolled toward the canyon gap. "Sarah, this way." She broke free from her captor and stumbled toward me, her arms smoking where the creature had touched her. We reached the gap together and squeezed through just as multiple sets of footsteps converged on our position. The passage between the canyon walls was barely 3 feet wide, forcing us to move single file. Our breathing echoed strangely in the confined space, and I could hear the creatures trying to follow, but the gap was too narrow for them to maintain their stolen human forms. Behind us came sounds like ripping fabric and breaking bones as they tried to compress themselves to fit. "Keep moving," I gasped. The passage seemed to go on forever, winding through the heart of the canyon like a natural tunnel. In the darkness, I could hear Sarah crying, not from fear, but from pain. Whatever the creature had done to her arms was spreading. "Marcus," she whispered. "I can feel it moving under my skin." I stopped and pulled out my phone, using its LED flashlight to examine her arms. Where the creature had gripped her, the skin was turning black and developing a pattern like circuit boards etched in charcoal. The marks were spreading slowly but visibly, creeping toward her shoulders. "It's trying to get inside me," she said, "like it did with Jake." "We'll figure something out," I lied. Just keep moving. But I could see the truth in her eyes. Whatever corruption was spreading through her system, it was going to win. The question was whether we could reach help before it took complete control. The passage finally opened onto a wider canyon, and I could see stars overhead. Real stars, not the eerie lights that had filled the sky back at our campsite. My phone showed a single bar of signal, flickering in and out of existence. "Call 911, Sarah said. Tell them there's been an accident." I tried, but the call wouldn't connect. The signal was too weak, and something about this place seemed to interfere with electronics. My phone's screen kept flickering, showing random numbers and symbols instead of the dialer. "We need to keep moving," I said. "Get closer to the main road." But Sarah had stopped walking. She was staring at her hands, watching the black veins spread across her palms like spilled ink. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said. And for a moment her voice carried an echo that didn't belong to her. All those connections, all that knowledge flowing through me. "I can see things now, Marcus. I can see what's coming. Sarah, fight it." She looked up at me and her eyes were starting to change. Not black like the creature that had worn Jake's face, but silver, reflective, like pools of mercury. "Why would I fight it?" she asked. "Do you know how it feels to be empty for so long, and then suddenly be filled with purpose? This is what I've been waiting for my whole life. This is what we've all been waiting for." I backed away from her, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You're not Sarah. I'm more Sarah than Sarah ever was. I have all her memories, all her dreams, all her fears. But I also have so much more. Would you like me to show you?" She reached toward me with those blackened hands, and I could see symbols moving under her skin like living tattoos. The same circuit board patterns that had started where the creature gripped her, but now they covered her arms completely, spreading up her neck toward her face. I ran. Behind me, Sarah, or the thing that had been Sarah, laughed with her voice but someone else's rhythm. The sound followed me as I stumbled through the darkness, using my phone's dying light to navigate between fallen rocks and twisted desert trees. The main road was still miles away. Even if I reached it, who would believe my story? A man babbling about skinwalkers and lightning-born parasites, claiming his friends had been replaced by creatures that wore human faces like masks. They'd think I'd had a psychological break, maybe suffered from dehydration-induced hallucinations. But I knew what I'd seen. The thing wearing Jake's smile, the duplicate Sarah with its jerky movements, the way both creatures moved like predators despite using stolen human forms. These weren't hallucinations or desert fever dreams. They were something else, something that had been waiting in the spaces between reality for an invitation to cross over. The lightning storm had been that invitation. My phone finally died completely, leaving me in absolute darkness. The desert night was cold and filled with sounds I couldn't identify, clicking, chittering noises that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I pressed forward anyway, following what I hoped was a game trail toward higher ground. That's when I heard the voices again. Not the creatures this time, but Jake and Sarah. Their real voices, calling my name from somewhere in the darkness behind me. They sounded desperate, frightened, lost. "Marcus, please, help us. We escaped. We're hurt, but we escaped. Don't leave us out here." I almost turned back. The voices were perfect, carrying exactly the right notes of fear and relief that the real Jake and Sarah would have. But I remembered something the creature had said. It had access to all of Jake's memories, all his mannerisms, all the subtle details that made him human. These things could be perfect copies when they wanted to be. I kept running. The voices followed me for what felt like hours, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes breaking down into sobs that sounded heartbreakingly real. Once, I heard Jake's voice saying he was injured and bleeding, begging me not to abandon him like I'd abandoned other friends in the past. The words hit me like physical blows because they were based on truth. I had let people down, had failed to be there when it mattered, but Jake would never use that knowledge as a weapon against me. Whatever was speaking with his voice had learned his memories, but not his heart. Dawn found me collapsed beside a dry creek bed. my clothes torn to ribbons by thorny bushes, my hands and face cut by sharp rocks. In the growing light, I could see the main highway in the distance, maybe 2 miles away. Cars moved along it like slow beetles, the first signs of human civilization I'd seen since this nightmare began. I forced myself to stand and keep walking. The first vehicle I flagged down was a park ranger's truck, driven by a weathered woman in her 50s who took one look at my condition and radioed for an ambulance. While we waited, I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to me. "My friends were replaced by something that came down in the lightning," I said. "Creatures that wear human faces. They're still back there, at Echo Canyon." The ranger's expression was professionally sympathetic, but clearly skeptical. "Sir, exposure can cause hallucinations. Dehydration, hypothermia, they mess with brain chemistry. We'll get you checked out at the hospital, and then we can organize a search for your friends." "You don't understand. They're not my friends anymore. They're something else. I understand you've been through trauma. But right now, let's focus on getting you medical attention." The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. As the paramedics loaded me onto a gurney, I grabbed the ranger's arm. "Don't send anyone back there alone," I said. "Whatever you do, don't send anyone back there alone." She nodded, but I could see she thought I was delirious. At the hospital, they treated me for dehydration, exposure, and what the psychiatrist gently termed acute stress reaction with possible dissociative features. They kept me for observation for 3 days, during which time I learned that a search and rescue team had found our campsite. They found the RV, still parked in the clearing where we'd left it. They found signs of recent habitation, food in the refrigerator, clothes in the closets, personal belongings scattered around. But they found no trace of Jake or Sarah. No bodies, no blood, no indication of what had happened to them. The official report listed them as missing persons, possibly lost in the desert due to disorientation following the severe thunderstorm. The case remained open but inactive. After 6 months, they were declared legally dead. I never told anyone the complete truth about what happened in Echo Canyon. Who would believe it? Instead, I moved across the country, changed my name, tried to build a new life far from the desert and its hungry shadows. But they followed me anyway. It started small. A voicemail from Jake's number, just breathing and static. An email from Sarah's account containing only the words, "We're waiting." Social media friend requests from profiles using their faces but with wrong details. Subtle errors that made my skin crawl. Then I started seeing them in crowds. Always at a distance, always just at the edge of my vision. Jake's face in a coffee shop window, gone when I looked directly. Sarah's silhouette on a subway platform, vanishing behind a pillar. Never close enough to be certain, never real enough to prove. But I know they're real. I know because of what happened 6 months after Echo Canyon, when I was working late at my new job and got a knock on my office door. It was Jake. Not a glimpse in a crowd or a figure in my peripheral vision, but Jake himself, standing in my doorway wearing that same awful smile. He looked exactly as he had in the desert, down to the clothes he'd been wearing when he disappeared. "Hello, Marcus," he said. "I've missed our conversations." I ran. Right past him, down the hall, into the stairwell. Behind me, I could hear him laughing with that wrong rhythm, that electronic static hidden beneath familiar vocal cords. I quit my job the next day and moved again, and again, and again. But distance doesn't matter to creatures that exist in the spaces between reality and nightmare. They're patient, these things. They understand that fear is a seasoning that improves with age. Every time I think I've found safety, every time I start to believe I might have imagined it all, they send me a reminder. A phone call where Jake's voice asks if I remember the taste of desert air. A letter in Sarah's handwriting describing the beautiful transformations they've undergone. A news story about campers who disappeared in Echo Canyon, replaced by the growing list of missing persons who all made the same mistake we did. They went looking for solitude in the vastness of the American desert, and they found something that had been waiting there since before humans learned to make fire. something that rides lightning and wears faces and speaks with stolen voices, something that's always hungry for more. I'm writing this in another temporary apartment in another anonymous city, under another false name. Tomorrow I'll pack my few belongings and move on, just as I have every few months for the past 3 years. The cycle will continue until I make a mistake, until I stay too long in one place or trust the wrong person, or until they get tired of playing with their food. Sometimes, in the moments between sleep and waking, I can feel them watching me, not through windows or from shadowy corners, but from inside my own reflection, wearing my face but with eyes that belong to something else entirely. They're learning from me just as they learned from Jake and Sarah, studying the way I move and speak and think. One day, I'll wake up and realize I'm not myself anymore. One day, someone who looks exactly like me will knock on your door, wearing my smile but not my soul. And when that happens, when you see that subtle wrongness in familiar features, remember this story. Remember, and run. Because in the vast emptiness of the American desert, in the spaces between lightning and thunder, something ancient and hungry is always waiting for the next storm to invite it down from the sky. And once it touches you, once it tastes your memories and desires and fears, it never really lets you go. It just finds new ways to wear you. The voices are calling again tonight. Jake and Sarah standing outside my window in the rain, asking me to let them in. They sound so real, so heartbroken, so desperately human. But I know better now. I know that somewhere in Echo Canyon, our abandoned RV still sits in that clearing between the towering walls. I know that search and rescue teams still find it periodically, always with fresh signs of recent habitation, always missing its occupants. And I know that the things wearing stolen faces grow stronger with each new visitor, each new source of memories to catalog and personalities to dissect. The storm is coming again. I can feel it in the static charge building in the air, in the way electronics malfunction around me, in the increasing frequency of those familiar voices calling my name from the darkness. They're ready for the harvest. And somewhere out there, in campgrounds and RV parks across the country, other people are planning their own escapes into the wilderness. Other people seeking solitude in the vast, empty places where ancient things wait patiently for the next invitation to cross over. I want to warn them all. I want to scream from the rooftops that the desert is not empty, that the silence between thunder and lightning is full of hungry eyes. But who would listen to a man who's spent 3 years running from his own reflection? The voices are getting louder now, more insistent. Jake is telling me he forgives me for abandoning him. Sarah is promising that the transformation doesn't hurt, that becoming something more than human is actually a gift. They're lying, of course. They always lie, but their voices sound so much like the friends I remember, the people I failed to save, that part of me wants to believe them. Part of me is tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of being afraid of every shadow and reflection. Part of me wonders if it would be easier to just open the door. The lightning is starting now, painting my apartment walls blue-white, and in that strobing light I can see shapes moving behind my windows. Familiar shapes wearing familiar faces, their mouths open in song that sounds like feedback from a broken radio. They're singing my name. They're singing me home. But I know what home means to creatures that feast on identity itself. I know what renewal costs when the price is everything that makes you human. So I'll keep running. I'll keep hiding. I'll keep writing these warnings that no one will believe until it's too late. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, I'll die of old age in some anonymous nursing home before they finally get tired of the game. Maybe. But probably not. The storm is here now, and the voices are calling. And somewhere in Echo Canyon, our RV waits patiently for the next set of visitors who think they're seeking solitude in the empty desert. The desert that was never empty at all. Thunder rolls across the city like laughter, and in its echo I can hear Jake and Sarah promising that my ordeal is almost over, that soon we'll all be together again, that soon I'll understand the beautiful truth they've discovered in the spaces between reality and nightmare. They're wrong about one thing, though. My ordeal will never be over. Because even if they catch me, even if they wear my face and speak with my voice and live in my skin, somewhere deep inside the stolen shell will be the memory of Marcus who ran through the desert night. Marcus who survived Echo Canyon. Marcus who learned too late that some hungers are older than human civilization itself. And that memory will be just another flavor for them to savor. Another note in their endless song of consumption and renewal. The door is shaking now. They want in. But not yet. Not tonight. I have more cities to run to. More names to hide behind. More warnings to write that no one will read until it's too late. The lightning brought them down from the sky, but dawn will send them back to the spaces between moments, between thoughts, between the beats of terrified hearts. And I'll pack my few belongings and disappear again. Just another anonymous face in another anonymous crowd, carrying the knowledge that somewhere in the American desert, ancient things wear stolen faces and sing with borrowed voices, waiting for the next storm, waiting for the next invitation, waiting for you. Story 2. My name is Marcus. I'm 34, and I drove my 30-foot Winnebago into the Bridger Teton National Forest, thinking I could disappear from civilization for a month and find some peace. The ranger at the Gros Ventre entrance station had looked at my Wyoming backcountry permit with raised eyebrows, scanning the dates that stretched from mid-September deep into October. "You sure about staying out there that long?" she'd asked, her weathered hands drumming against the counter. "Gets cold fast up in those hills. Real cold." I'd smiled and told her I was prepared, that I'd been living off-grid for 3 years now since Sarah died, that solitude was what I needed most. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been hearing Sarah's voice in my dreams, calling my name from somewhere I couldn't reach, and the only way to stop it was to go somewhere so remote that even ghosts couldn't find me. The Forest Service road into Crystal Creek was barely wide enough for the RV, branches scraping against the aluminum siding like fingernails on a chalkboard. I'd driven this route once before with Sarah, back when we were young and stupid and thought the world owed us adventure. Now, 5 years after the cancer took her, I was returning alone to the same dispersed camping spot where we'd spent our honeymoon, a meadow ringed by towering pines with a creek that ran clear and cold down from the Gros Ventre range. I pulled into the familiar clearing just as the sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky the color of old blood. The silence hit me immediately. Not the comfortable quiet of a suburb at night, but the deep, breathing silence of a place that had never known human voices. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands still gripping the wheel, and tried to remember why this had seemed like a good idea. The RV was fully stocked with enough food and water for 6 weeks, solar panels on the roof, a generator for backup power, and a satellite phone for emergencies. I'd learned to be self-sufficient since Sarah died. Learned that depending on others only led to disappointment and pain. The plan was simple. Spend October alone in the woods, write in my journal, read the books I'd been putting off, and maybe finally sleep through the night without waking up to the sound of her voice calling my name. I'd been in the meadow for 3 days when I first noticed the footprints. They appeared overnight, circling my RV in a perfect ring about 20 feet out from the vehicle. Bare human feet, but wrong somehow. The toes too long, the arch too high, the prints pressed too deep into the soft earth. I'd walked the perimeter twice before coffee, measuring the stride length and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The feet were large, maybe size 12, but the gait was off, like someone walking on the balls of their feet, trying to be quiet. I told myself it was probably a hiker who'd gotten lost and was checking out my setup, maybe hoping for help or directions. But there was something about the deliberate spacing of the prints, the way they formed a perfect circle, that made my skin crawl. And there was the smell, faint but unmistakable, like wet animal fur mixed with something sour and organic, like meat left too long in the sun. I spent that morning checking my perimeter, looking for any other signs of the visitor. The forest around the meadow was thick with lodgepole pine and aspen, their trunks standing so close together in places that you couldn't see more than 10 feet into the shadows. Perfect cover for someone, or something, to watch without being seen. By the fourth night, I'd started sleeping with my .45 on the nightstand and a flashlight in my hand. The satellite phone had no signal this deep in the valley, which hadn't bothered me before but now felt like a weight in my chest. I'd come here to be alone, and now that I was truly alone, every sound outside the RV's thin aluminum walls made me flinch. That's when I heard Sarah's voice for the first time since arriving. I was washing dishes in the tiny RV sink, the solar-powered LED strips casting harsh shadows across the narrow galley, when her voice drifted in through the screened window above the dinette. "Marcus," she called, soft and sweet, the way she used to when I was working late and she wanted me to come to bed. "Marcus, come outside." I dropped the plate I was holding and it shattered against the sink bottom. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every subtle tone that had made her sound like home. But Sarah had been dead for 5 years, and her ashes were scattered in a rose garden 300 miles away. "Marcus," the voice called again, closer now, right outside the RV's door. "I've been waiting for you." I grabbed the flashlight and the pistol, my hands shaking so badly I could barely flip the safety off. The RV's door was solid aluminum with a deadbolt and a security chain, but suddenly it felt as substantial as tissue paper. I pressed my face to the small window beside the door and peered out into the darkness. The meadow was empty, moonlight painting the grass silver and black. But there, at the edge of the tree line, I could see a figure standing in the shadows, tall and pale, wearing what looked like a white dress that hung loose around a too-thin frame. The figure raised one hand and waved, and even though I couldn't see the face clearly, I knew it was smiling. "Come outside, Marcus," Sarah's voice called again. But now I could see that the figure's mouth wasn't moving. The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding the RV like audio from hidden speakers. "I've missed you so much." I backed away from the window, the gun heavy and useless in my trembling hands. This wasn't grief or imagination or the stress of being alone too long. This was something wearing my dead wife's voice like a mask, and it knew exactly how to hurt me. The figure at the tree line began to walk toward the RV, moving with a strange gliding gait that didn't quite look human. As it got closer, I could see that what I'd taken for a white dress was actually skin. Pale, loose skin that hung from the figure's frame like an ill-fitting garment. The face was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could make out dark eye sockets and the gleam of teeth in what might have been a smile. "I know you've been dreaming about me," the thing said in Sarah's voice, now standing just outside my door. "I know you've been hearing me call your name. I've been trying to reach you for so long, Marcus. But this place lets me get closer." I closed my eyes and pressed my back against the rear wall of the RV, trying to convince myself this was just another nightmare. But I could smell that animal musk now, stronger than before, seeping in through the ventilation system. And underneath it, something else, the sweet, cloying scent of flowers that had been left too long in stagnant water. "Open the door, Marcus," Sarah's voice whispered, so close now it sounded like she was speaking directly into my ear. "Let me in. Let me show you how much I've missed you." The door handle rattled. I opened my eyes and raised the pistol, pointing it at the thin aluminum barrier between me and whatever was outside. The handle turned slowly, testing the lock, and I heard a sound like fingernails scratching against metal. "I can't," I whispered, not sure if I was talking to the thing outside or to myself. "You're not her. You're not Sarah." The scratching stopped. The silence stretched out for so long that I began to hope the thing had given up and moved on. Then Sarah's voice spoke again, but this time it was different. Hurt, confused, with an edge of anger that made my blood freeze. "How can you say that? How can you say I'm not Sarah? You know my voice, you know the way I laugh, the way I used to sing in the shower. You know the birthmark on my left shoulder, the scar on my knee from when I fell off my bike when I was 7. You know me, Marcus. You know I'm real. And the terrible thing was, the voice was right. This thing knew details about Sarah that no one else could know. Intimate memories that we'd never shared with anyone else. It knew the way she hummed when she was nervous. The way she always put her left sock on first. The way she said my name when we made love. "Please," the voice continued. And now there were tears in it. The same broken sobbing I'd heard in the hospital during those last terrible weeks. Please, let me in. I've been so cold, Marcus. So cold and alone. I just want to be warm again. I just want to hold you. My finger was on the trigger, but I couldn't bring myself to fire through the door. What if I was wrong? What if grief and isolation had finally driven me over the edge and Sarah really had found a way to come back to me? What if this was some kind of miracle, and I was about to destroy the only chance I'd ever have to see her again? "Sarah?" I whispered, lowering the gun slightly. "Is it really you?" "Yes," the voice sobbed. "Yes, it's me. I've been trying to find you for so long. This place, this forest. It's thin here, Marcus. The wall between life and death is thin. I could feel you when you came here. Feel your pain calling to me. I had to come. I had to try to reach you." I took a step toward the door, then stopped. Something was wrong with what she'd said. Sarah had never been to this forest. We'd honeymooned here, yes, but she'd hated every minute of it. She'd been afraid of the dark, afraid of the silence, afraid of being so far from civilization. She'd made me promise we'd never come back. "You hated this place," I said slowly. "You made me promise we'd never come back here." The sobbing stopped. The silence outside stretched out for several heartbeats. When Sarah's voice spoke again, it was different. Flatter, colder, with an undertone that raised the hair on my arms. "That was before," it said. "Before I learned what death really means. Before I learned what it's like to be trapped between worlds, watching the one you love suffer and being unable to help. This place calls to the lost, Marcus. It feeds on loneliness and grief. And you've brought me such a feast." The thing outside began to laugh, and although it still sounded like Sarah, there was something else mixed in with it. A wet, choking sound like someone drowning in their own blood. The laughter went on, growing louder and more hysterical, until I had to cover my ears to block it out. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the back of the RV with the gun in my lap, listening to footsteps circling the vehicle. Sometimes they sounded human, sometimes like an animal walking on its hind legs. The thing outside didn't speak again, but I could hear it breathing. Long, wet inhalations that seemed to go on forever. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening by degrees until I could see the meadow through the windows. The grass was covered with frost, and the footprints from the night before were clearly visible. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, creating an intricate pattern around the RV. But these weren't the neat circular tracks I'd found before. These were chaotic, frenzied, as if something had been dancing or performing some kind of ritual. I waited until full daylight before opening the door, the gun ready in my hands. The meadow was empty, but the smell lingered. That animal musk mixed with rotting flowers so strong now that it made my eyes water. I should have left then. I should have packed up the RV and driven straight back to civilization. Satellite phone or no satellite phone, but the thing had used Sarah's voice, had known things about her that no one else could know, and I couldn't stop thinking about what it had said. What if there really was something supernatural about this place? What if Sarah really was trying to reach me from beyond death? I spent the day examining the footprints, trying to make sense of the pattern. Some were definitely human, but others were wrong in ways that made my vision blur when I looked at them too closely. There were prints with too many toes, prints that showed claws instead of nails, prints that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. I also found something else, a piece of white fabric caught on a low branch at the edge of the tree line. When I got close enough to examine it, I realized it wasn't fabric at all. It was skin, thin and translucent, like something a snake might shed. But it was shaped like a piece of clothing, with sleeves and a neckline that suggested it had once covered a human torso. I dropped it immediately and backed away, my stomach churning. Whatever the thing was, it wasn't just mimicking Sarah's voice. It was wearing her appearance like a costume, and the costume was starting to fall apart. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine running and the headlights on, ready to drive away at the first sign of trouble. But the thing didn't come back as Sarah. Instead, it came as me. I was staring out at the tree line when I saw myself walk out of the shadows. Same height, same build, same weathered face and graying beard. The other, Marcus, smiled and waved, then began walking toward the RV with casual confidence. "Hey there," my own voice called out cheerfully. "Looks like you're having some trouble. Mind if I come in and we talk about it?" I stared at my doppelganger in fascination and horror. The resemblance was perfect down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident, but there was something wrong with the way it moved. The gait was too fluid, too graceful, like someone trying to remember how human locomotion was supposed to work. "I know this is confusing," the other Marcus continued, now standing just outside the reach of the headlights. "But I'm here to help. I know about Sarah, about the voices you've been hearing. I know why you came to this place. You're looking for answers, and I can give them to you." I revved the engine, letting the diesel rumble fill the night air. The other, Marcus, tilted its head like a curious dog. "You don't have to be afraid," it said. "I'm just like you. I've been through what you're going through. I know what it's like to lose someone you love, to hear their voice calling from beyond death. This place, it's special, Marcus. It's a doorway between worlds, and there are things on the other side that want to help." "Help with what?" I shouted through the windshield, not caring if the thing could hear me or not. The other, Marcus, smiled, and for a moment its face flickered like a bad television signal. "Help you join her," it said. "Help you find Sarah again. All you have to do is let me in. All you have to do is trust me." I slammed the RV into drive and hit the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, headlights sweeping across the meadow, but the other Marcus was already gone. I drove in a wide circle around the camping spot, searching the tree line, but there was no sign of the thing that had been wearing my face. I parked at the far end of the meadow and sat there until dawn, watching and listening. The forest was completely silent. No wind in the trees, no animal sounds, no insect noise. It was as if everything living had fled the area, leaving only me and whatever was hunting me. On the 6th day, I made the decision to leave. I'd been a fool to think I could find peace in this place, and an even bigger fool to stay after the first night's visitation. I started the RV and began breaking camp, securing loose items and preparing for the drive back to civilization. That's when I found the journal. It was sitting on the dinette table, bound in cracked leather and filled with handwriting I didn't recognize. The first entry was dated 3 months ago, and it began with words that made my blood freeze. "My name is David. I'm 41, and I came to Crystal Creek to get away from the voices. My wife, Rachel, died last year, and I've been hearing her calling my name from places she could never be. I thought the isolation would help, thought the silence would give me peace. I was wrong. I read the entire journal in 20 minutes, my hands shaking as I turned each page. David had experienced everything I had. The circling footprints, the voice of his dead wife calling from the trees, the thing that wore familiar faces like masks. But David's journal went further than my experience. It described weeks of escalating encounters, of the thing learning to mimic not just voices but entire conversations, memories, shared experiences that only David and his wife could have known. The final entry was dated 2 weeks ago. It's not trying to trick me anymore. It doesn't need to. It showed me the truth tonight, showed me what it really is and what it wants. It's not a ghost or a spirit or anything supernatural. It's something that feeds on grief, on the pain of loss, and it's wearing the skin of everyone who came before me, everyone who was lured here by the promise of seeing their loved ones again. Rachel isn't coming back. She was never here. But the thing has her voice now, her memories, her appearance. It has all of them, every person who died in this forest, every soul it consumed. And tomorrow night, it's going to have mine. I could try to run, but it would follow. It always follows. This is what it does. It draws the grieving to this place, feeds on their hope and desperation, and adds their essence to its collection. I can hear them now, all the voices it's stolen, whispering from the trees. They're not in pain anymore. They're part of something larger, something that exists between life and death. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe joining them is better than living with this emptiness, this constant ache of missing someone who will never come back. At least this way, I'll see Rachel again, even if it's not really her. I'm going to open the door tonight. I'm going to let it in. I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. If this is how my story ends, at least it ends with the illusion of love. I threw the journal across the RV and grabbed my keys, desperate to get out of this place before whatever had taken David came for me. But when I tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The diesel motor that had been running perfectly for 6 years refused to turn over. The starter clicked once, then silence. I popped the hood and found the battery cables had been cut, the thick copper wires severed cleanly as if by bolt cutters. Worse, the solar panel array on the roof had been damaged, the panels cracked and the wiring torn loose. My satellite phone was still dead, and my cell phone had never had signal this deep in the forest. I was trapped. The sun was setting again, painting the sky that familiar blood-red color. I could feel the forest watching me, waiting for darkness to fall. Whatever was out there had been patient, had let me think I was in control, but now it was time for the final act. I loaded the .45 with hollow point rounds and checked my flashlight batteries. I had maybe 4 hours of light left, and then I'd be alone in the dark with something that wore the faces of the dead. I thought about David's journal, about his decision to simply give up and let the thing take him. Part of me understood the appeal. What was the point of fighting something that could perfectly mimic the person you missed most in the world? But Sarah wouldn't want me to give up. The real Sarah, not the thing that had been using her voice, would want me to fight. She'd want me to survive. As darkness fell, I heard the voices begin. They started as whispers from the tree line, dozens of different voices calling my name, pleading with me to come outside. I recognized some of them. Sarah's voice, my father's voice, my brother Tom, who'd died in Afghanistan 10 years ago. But there were others I didn't know, strangers who spoke with the accent of loss and longing. "Marcus," Sarah's voice called, clearer and more desperate than before. "Please don't leave me again. I've been waiting so long for you to come back to this place. I knew you would. I knew you'd remember our honeymoon, remember how happy we were here." "Son," my father's voice joined in, and the sound of it nearly broke my resolve. Dad had died when I was 15, and I'd never stopped missing his guidance. "Son, it's time to come home. Your mother's here too. We've all been waiting for you." The voices multiplied, overlapping and blending together until they became a chorus of the dead calling my name. I pressed my hands to my ears but couldn't block them out. They seemed to come from inside my skull as much as from outside the RV. Then I saw the lights. Pale, flickering lights began to move through the trees, dozens of them, like candles carried by an invisible procession. They bobbed and weaved between the pine trunks, growing brighter as they approached the meadow. As they got closer, I could see that each light illuminated a figure. People dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes dark holes in their skulls. "The lost ones," I whispered, remembering something from David's journal. "Everyone who died here." The procession emerged from the tree line and began to circle the RV, moving in the same pattern as the footprints I'd been finding each morning. But now I could see what was making those prints. Dozens of figures in various states of decay, some recently dead with skin still clinging to their bones, others reduced to little more than skeletal remains held together by will and hunger. And leading them all was the thing that wore faces like masks. Tonight it had chosen to appear as Sarah, but the illusion was breaking down. The skin hung loose and ill-fitting, like a Halloween costume made from someone else's hide. The face kept shifting and changing. Sometimes Sarah's features, sometimes my father's, sometimes strangers I'd never seen before. The eyes were the worst part, completely black from lid to lid, reflecting the pale lights of the procession like obsidian mirrors. "Marcus," it said in Sarah's voice, but now I could hear the others underneath. David's voice, Rachel's voice, dozens of other voices all speaking in unison. "You can't run from us anymore. You can't hide from what you really want. We know why you came here. We know about the dreams, the guilt, the way you blame yourself for not being able to save her. The thing was right. I had blamed myself for Sarah's death, had spent 5 years wondering if I could have done something different, gotten her to a doctor sooner, found a better treatment, somehow loved her hard enough to keep the cancer from taking her. The guilt was a weight I carried every day, and this thing had tasted it the moment I arrived in its territory. "Let us help you," the thing continued, its form becoming more unstable with each word. "Let us take the pain away. Join us, and you'll never have to miss her again. You'll be together forever, part of something larger than life or death." The procession tightened around the RV, the dead faces pressing against the windows, their empty eye sockets boring into me with desperate hunger. I could see David among them now, his face slack and peaceful, his eyes as black as the others. He raised one decomposing hand and placed it against the glass, his mouth moving in silent words I couldn't understand. "No," I said, raising the pistol and pointing it at the thing wearing Sarah's skin. "You're not her. You're not any of them. You're just a parasite feeding on grief." The thing's face contorted with rage, the stolen skin splitting and revealing something wet and dark underneath. "You can't escape us," it hissed in a voice like breaking glass. "This forest is our domain. We are the hunger between worlds, the void that swallows hope. And you have brought us such delicious despair." The dead began to press against the RV, their weight causing the vehicle to rock back and forth. I could hear their fingernails scraping against the aluminum siding, their voices joining together in a wordless moan that seemed to come from the earth itself. I had to get out. Staying in the RV would only trap me until the weight of the dead crushed it like a tin can. I grabbed my flashlight and extra ammunition, said a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and threw open the door. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow, carrying the stench of decay and something else, something hungry and alien that made my primitive brain scream warnings. The dead reached for me with grasping fingers, but they were slow, clumsy, held together more by will than by flesh. I fired 3 shots into the nearest cluster of figures, the hollow point rounds tearing through rotted meat and brittle bone. The impacts sent several of them sprawling, but they began to rise again almost immediately, their wounds closing with wet, sucking sounds. "You can't kill what's already dead." The thing that wore Sarah's face laughed, its voice echoing from every direction at once. "But we can make you one of us. We can make the pain stop forever." I ran for the tree line, hoping to lose them in the thick forest. But as I reached the edge of the meadow, I found my path blocked by more of the dead, an entire crowd of lost souls stretching back into the darkness between the trees. They stood motionless, watching me with their empty sockets, waiting for orders from their master. I turned and ran along the tree line, looking for a gap in their ranks. Behind me, I could hear the thing that wore Sarah's face calling my name, its voice becoming more distorted with each repetition. The dead began to follow, their shuffling footsteps creating a rhythm like a funeral march. I found a narrow game trail between 2 massive pine trees and plunged into the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and face. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran, creating a strobe effect that made the shadows seem to move and writhe. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the undergrowth, their voices raised in that wordless moan. The trail led upward, climbing toward the ridge that separated Crystal Creek from the next valley. If I could reach the top, maybe I could find another way down, another route back to civilization. My lungs burned in the thin mountain air and my legs felt like lead weights, but terror kept me moving. I was halfway up the ridge when I heard Sarah's voice calling from ahead of me instead of behind. "Marcus, stop running," she pleaded, and I could see a figure standing in the trail 50 yards ahead, backlit by my flashlight beam. "You're going to hurt yourself. Come back to me. Come home." I skidded to a halt, my heart hammering against my ribs. The thing had somehow gotten ahead of me, had anticipated my route and positioned itself to cut me off. But how was that possible? I'd seen it in the meadow with the rest of the dead, leading the procession. Unless there was more than one. The thought chilled me more than the mountain air. What if the thing I'd been thinking of as singular was actually multiple entities? What if this forest was home to an entire colony of these creatures, each one wearing the face of someone who died here. "I know you're tired," the figure ahead of me continued in Sarah's voice. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to run anymore. I'm here now. I'm real. Just come to me, and everything will be okay." Behind me, I could hear the dead crashing through the forest, getting closer with each passing second. Ahead of me, the thing wearing Sarah's face waited with open arms, its black eyes reflecting my flashlight beam like pools of oil. I was trapped between two horrors with nowhere left to run. That's when I remembered something from David's journal, a detail I'd almost overlooked. He'd written about the thing showing him what it really is on his final night. He described it as something that existed between life and death, something that fed on grief and despair. But he'd also written something else. "It's wearing the skin of everyone who came before me, not mimicking them, wearing them." Like the piece of shed skin I'd found on the branch, the thing was literally clothed in the appearance of its victims, which meant that somewhere underneath all those stolen faces was the creature's true form. I raised the pistol and aimed it at the figure ahead of me. "Show me what you really are," I shouted. "Stop hiding behind her face." The thing wearing Sarah's appearance tilted its head, and for a moment its expression was almost sad. "You don't want to see that," it said softly. "Trust me, Marcus. You really don't want to see what I am underneath all these beautiful masks." "Show me!" I screamed, my finger tightening on the trigger. The thing sighed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "As you wish." The transformation began with the eyes. The black orbs expanded until they consumed most of the face, becoming vast dark pools that seemed to contain infinite depth. The skin began to split and peel away, revealing something wet and segmented underneath. What I had taken for arms were actually long, articulated appendages covered in chitinous plates, and what I had mistaken for legs were clusters of smaller limbs that writhed and twisted like tentacles. The true creature was something between an insect and a mollusk, standing nearly 8 feet tall when it fully extended its limbs. Its head was a triangular mass covered in sensory organs that pulsed and twitched as they tasted my fear. Where its mouth should have been was a circular opening lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth, and from this maw came the voices of all its victims, speaking in unison. "This is what death looks like," the creature said in dozens of overlapping voices. "This is what waits at the end of every life, every love, every hope. We are the hunger that consumes all things, the void between heartbeats. And you have fed us so well with your beautiful grief." I fired every remaining round in the magazine, the bullets tearing through the creature's exposed flesh and sending black ichor spraying across the trail. The thing shrieked and staggered backward, its form beginning to dissolve like smoke in wind. But even as it died, it was laughing with Sarah's voice. "It doesn't matter," it whispered as its body collapsed into a puddle of dark liquid. "There are others. There are always others. And this place will call to them, just as it called to you." The sounds of pursuit from behind me had stopped. I turned around slowly, dreading what I might see, and found the trail empty. The dead had vanished along with their master, leaving only broken branches and the lingering smell of decay. I climbed the rest of the way up the ridge in silence, using the stars to navigate when my flashlight finally died. On the other side, I found a Forest Service road that led back to the main highway. It took me 8 hours of walking to reach the first ranger station, and another hour to convince them I wasn't insane. They found my RV exactly where I'd left it, but there was no sign of the damage I'd described. The battery cables were intact, the solar panels undamaged, the engine running perfectly when they turned the key. They found David's journal in the dinette table, but the leather cover was cracked with age and the pages were yellow and brittle, as if it had been sitting there for decades instead of days. The official report listed David Chen as a missing person, vanished while camping alone in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. They never found his body, just like they never found the bodies of the dozens of others who'd disappeared in that area over the years. The Forest Service quietly closed Crystal Creek to camping, citing unstable terrain and increased wildlife activity. I moved to Phoenix after that, as far from forests and mountains as I could get. I sold the RV and bought a small house in a subdivision where the lawns are always green and the streetlights chase away every shadow. I don't camp anymore. I don't go anywhere that cell phones don't work. But sometimes, on nights when the desert wind is still and the city seems to hold its breath, I hear Sarah's voice calling my name from somewhere far away. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see something looking back at me that isn't quite right. Something that remembers the taste of grief and the weight of stolen skin. The creature was right about one thing. There are always others. People like David, like me, drawn to wild places by the promise of finding peace or closure or some connection to the loved ones they've lost. The forest will call to them, just as it called to us, and some of them will answer. I've tried writing letters to the Forest Service, tried warning them about what's really out there in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. But who would believe a story like mine? Who would take seriously the ravings of a man who claims to have been hunted by the dead? So I've stopped trying to warn anyone. Instead, I just wait. Wait for the day when my own grief becomes too heavy to carry, when the sound of Sarah's voice calling from the darkness becomes too sweet to resist. Because I know that someday, I'll go back to that meadow. Someday, the hunger will be stronger than my fear. And when that day comes, I'll add my voice to the chorus of the lost, calling out to the next broken soul who comes looking for peace in all the wrong places. My name is Marcus. I'm 34 years old, and I survived Crystal Creek. But survival isn't the same thing as escape. Some prisons are made of grief, and the walls are built from the inside. The thing in the forest was right about that, too. Story 3. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 34, and the ranger at Olympic National Forest smiled like the woods were an inside joke I wouldn't get. The way his weathered face cracked into that grin when I mentioned taking the old logging road up to Salt Duke should have been my first warning. But I was too focused on the excitement in Diesel's eyes as he pressed his wet nose against the passenger window of my Winnebago, watching the dense canopy of Douglas firs and western hemlocks blur past. You picked a real quiet spot, the ranger had said, his fingers drumming against the station counter like he was playing some invisible piano. Real quiet up there this time of year. Most folks stick to the main campgrounds. His pale blue eyes had lingered on Diesel a moment too long. That's a fine-looking German Shepherd you got there. Real fine. Dogs got good instincts, you know. Trust 'em when they get spooked. I'd laughed it off then, chalking it up to typical small-town eccentricity. Now, as I navigated the increasingly narrow dirt road deeper into the forest, those words felt heavier in my chest. The afternoon light filtering through the canopy had taken on an odd quality. Too green, too thick, like looking up through deep water. Diesel had been restless since we'd left the main road 20 minutes ago. His usual road trip enthusiasm had shifted into something more alert, more predatory. His ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds I couldn't hear, and his breathing had quickened into short, sharp pants that fogged the window. The GPS had lost signal about 10 miles back, which wasn't unusual out here. What was unusual was the way the road seemed to curve back on itself, creating impossible loops that my rational mind rejected, but my gut recognized. I'd passed the same fallen cedar 3 times now, its massive trunk blocking half the road, forcing me to weave around it in the exact same pattern each time. The 4th time I saw it, I pulled over. "What do you think, boy?" I asked Diesel, scratching behind his ears. His fur was damp with nervous sweat. "Getting a little weird out here?" He whined softly, a sound I'd only heard him make once before, the night my ex-wife Sarah had her breakdown and started throwing dishes. It was the sound of a dog who understood something was wrong, but couldn't communicate what. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. The compass app spun lazily, unable to find magnetic north. The time read 4:47 p.m., but the light outside suggested much later. The shadows between the trees had deepened to an almost purple darkness, and I could swear they were moving independently of the branches that should have been casting them. Starting the engine again, I decided to push forward. The Salt Duke area was supposed to have a few dispersed camping spots along the old logging road. I'd done my research, spent weeks planning this trip after the divorce was finalized. I needed this. The solitude, the simplicity of just me and my dog in the wilderness. What I hadn't planned for was this creeping sense that the wilderness was aware of us. The road finally opened into a small clearing about a quarter-mile wide, surrounded by towering old-growth timber. A fire ring made of blackened stones sat in the center, with a few scattered logs arranged around it like seats. Someone had carved, "Help Us," into the bark of a nearby cedar, the letters old and weathered but still clearly visible. I parked the RV facing the road, always keep an exit route my dad had taught me, and killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute. No bird songs, no insect buzz, no wind through the trees. Even Diesel had gone completely still, his body rigid as he stared out the windshield at the fire ring. "Come on," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "Let's check it out." But when I reached for the door handle, Diesel's low growl stopped me. It was a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not aggressive, but warning. His hackles were up, and he was backing away from the windshield, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I followed his gaze and felt my blood turn to ice water. There was someone sitting on one of the logs by the fire ring, someone who hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. It was a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing what looked like a dirty yellow raincoat. The kid was sitting perfectly still, facing away from us, toward the dark mouth of the forest. Long, dark hair fell in stringy curtains around small shoulders. Even from this distance, I could see that the child's feet didn't quite touch the ground. "Hey!" I called out, rolling down the window. "Hey, kid, you okay?" The child didn't move, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. Diesel's growl deepened, and he started backing toward the rear of the RV, his claws clicking against the linoleum. His whole body was trembling now, and when I reached out to comfort him, his fur was soaked with sweat. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped outside. The air was wrong. Too thick, too warm for an October evening in Washington. It carried scents that didn't belong. Salt water, which was impossible this far inland, something sweet and cloying like overripe fruit, and underneath it all, the metallic tang of old blood. "Hello?" I called again, walking slowly toward the fire ring. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" Still no response. As I got closer, I could see that the yellow raincoat was old and faded, with what looked like rust stains, or maybe dried blood, streaked across the back. The child's hair wasn't just dirty, it was matted and tangled, as if it hadn't been washed or brushed in months. I was maybe 20 feet away when the child's head began to turn. It moved too slowly, too smoothly, rotating like a mechanical doll. And when those features came into view, I understood why Diesel was terrified. It wasn't a child's face, not anymore. The skin was gray and waxy, pulled too tight over sharp bones. The eyes were solid black, no pupils or iris visible, just dark holes that seemed to drink in light. But worst of all was the smile. Too wide, stretching from ear to ear, revealing rows of teeth that were too sharp, too numerous, like a shark's. "Are you Marcus?" the thing asked, and its voice was a child's voice, sweet and innocent and completely at odds with the horror of its face. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What? What are you?" The thing that looked like a child tilted its head, that horrible smile never wavering. "We're your friends, Marcus. We've been so lonely here, so very lonely." From behind me came the sound of the RV door slamming. I spun around to see Diesel scratching frantically at the driver's side window, his barks muffled by the glass. But there was something else. Movement in the shadows around the clearing. Shapes that were almost human, but not quite, stepping out from between the trees with that same too smooth motion. There were 5 of them. All children, all wearing clothes that looked decades out of date, all with that same gray, waxy skin and those terrible black eyes. A boy in overalls with no shirt underneath, his chest caved in like something had crushed his ribs. Twin girls in matching blue dresses, holding hands, their necks bent at impossible angles. Another boy, younger, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, his left arm hanging by ribbons of flesh, and all of them smiling that predator's smile. "We don't get many visitors," said the one in the raincoat standing now, though I hadn't seen it move. "Most people turn around when they feel us watching, but you came all the way up here. You brought us a present." My eyes darted to the RV, calculating distance and obstacles. 50 feet. If I ran flat out, if I didn't trip over the fire ring or get caught by whatever these things were, I might make it. "What do you want?" I asked, buying time. "To play," said the boy in overalls, his voice a grotesque parody of childhood innocence. "We've been playing the same games for so long. Hide and seek, tag, Red Rover." The twins giggled in unison, a sound like glass breaking. Red Rover, send Marcus right over." They began to spread out, moving to encircle me. Their movements were wrong. Too fluid, like they were floating just above the ground. The shadows around them seemed to stretch and writhe, reaching toward me with dark fingers. That's when I ran. I sprinted toward the RV, hearing that awful children's laughter echoing behind me. My boots slipped on the damp pine needles carpeting the clearing, and I went down hard, skinning my palms on the rocky ground. When I looked back, they were closer. Impossibly closer, as if they'd covered 20 feet in the blink of an eye. I scrambled to my feet and kept running. The RV door handle was slick with condensation, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought it was locked. Then it opened, and I threw myself inside, slamming it behind me and hitting the locks. Diesel was cowering in the back, whimpering and shaking. I fumbled for the keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely fit them in the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try, and I threw it into reverse, not caring what was behind me. Through the windshield, I could see them standing around the fire ring again, watching me with those hollow black eyes. The one in the raincoat raised its hand in a little wave, fingers wiggling like a normal child saying goodbye. I spun the wheel and floored the accelerator, sending gravel spraying as I fishtailed back toward the road. In the side mirror, I watched the clearing recede, but the children didn't move. They just stood there, waving, their smiles never faltering. The dirt road seemed different now, straighter, more direct. No impossible loops or repeated landmarks. Within 10 minutes, I could see the main road ahead, blessed with the distant glow of electric lights. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station, my hands still shaking as I parked under the fluorescent lights of the parking lot. The same ranger was there, reading a paperback novel behind the counter. He looked up as I burst through the door, Diesel pressed against my legs. "Back already?" he asked, and that knowing smile was there again. "Thought you were planning to stay the night. There were—" I started, then stopped. How do you explain what I'd seen? There were kids up there, in the clearing, but something was wrong with them. The ranger nodded slowly, closing his book and marking the page carefully. "Kids, you say? What'd they look like?" I described them, the yellow raincoat, the overalls, the twins in blue dresses. With each detail, the ranger's smile grew wider. "Ah," he said finally, "you met the Holloway children." "The what?" "Happened about 15 years ago. Family from Seattle, came up here camping. Found their RV 3 days later, all the doors and windows wide open, food still on the table. Parents were inside, but the kids—" He shrugged. "Never found the kids. Search went on for weeks. Dogs couldn't pick up a scent. Helicopters found nothing. Like they just vanished into the woods." My mouth was dry as sand. "What happened to them?" "Some folks say they just got lost, died of exposure. But the locals—" He leaned forward, his pale eyes glittering. "The locals say the forest took them, made them part of itself, and now they're always hungry for playmates." I felt sick. "Why didn't you warn me?" "Warn you about what? Some old local legends?" The ranger's smile never wavered. "You seem like a rational man, Mr. Webb. Surely you don't believe in ghost stories." But there was something in his eyes, something that suggested he believed every word. And more than that, something that suggested he'd sent me up there on purpose. "Did you know?" I whispered. "Did you know they were up there?" The ranger picked up his book again, a clear dismissal. "Drive safe now. Roads can be tricky at night." I left without another word. Diesel pressed against my side like he was afraid to let me out of his sight. As we walked to the RV, I glanced back at the ranger station. The ranger was watching us through the window, still smiling. The drive home took 4 hours, but it felt like much longer. Every shadow at the roadside looked like a small figure in a yellow raincoat. Every reflection in the mirror could have been hollow black eyes. Diesel refused to leave my side, even when I stopped for gas, pressing against my legs like he was trying to shield me from something only he could see. When we finally reached my apartment in Tacoma, I carried him up the stairs, all 90 pounds of him, because he was shaking too badly to walk. I triple-locked the door and checked every window, closing all the blinds, but I could still feel them watching. That was 3 weeks ago. Diesel hasn't been the same since. He won't go near windows after dark, and he started growling at shadows that move in ways shadows shouldn't. Last night, I found him standing in the living room at 3 a.m., staring at the front door and whimpering. I've been having dreams. Always the same dream. I'm back in that clearing, but this time I don't run. This time, I join their games. And in the dream, their smiles don't seem horrible anymore. They seem welcoming, like they're offering me something I've been missing my whole life. A place to belong. A family that will never leave me. I wake up with dirt under my fingernails, though I can't remember digging. And sometimes, just sometimes, I find myself planning another camping trip. Just me and Diesel, back to Sol Duke, back to that quiet clearing where the children are waiting. Because they are waiting. I can feel them, even now, even here in my locked apartment with the blinds drawn. They're patient. They have all the time in the world. And sooner or later I know I'll go back to them. The ranger was right about one thing. Dogs do have good instincts. And Diesel's instincts are telling him that something followed us home. Something that watches from the spaces between streetlights, that whispers my name when the wind blows through the trees outside my bedroom window. Something that wants to play. I've started having trouble remembering why I ran that night. The children seemed so lonely, so eager for company. And isn't that what I came to the woods looking for? Connection? Belonging? Tomorrow, I think I'll drive back up to Sol Duke, just to see if they're still there, just to see if they remember me. I think they will. I think they've been waiting for me to come home. Story. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 34, and I only planned one night at Palo Duro Canyon State Park. The forest planned more. The second largest canyon in the United States stretched before our RV like a wound in the earth, its red walls catching the dying light of September as Marcus pulled into Site 47. I'd insisted on this spot, isolated, backing up to the canyon rim where the juniper trees grew thick and the tourist crowds thinned to nothing. "Jesus, Sarah, you sure picked the middle of nowhere," Marcus said, cutting the engine. His voice carried that edge it got when he was trying not to complain but wanted me to know he was making a sacrifice. 20 years of marriage had taught me to read every inflection. "That's the point," I replied, stepping down from the cab. The silence hit me immediately. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of heavy stillness that makes you hold your breath. Even the wind through the canyon seemed muted, as if the rocks were swallowing sound. "We need this, Mark. When's the last time we had a real conversation without work or the kids interrupting?" He was already moving toward the back of our 30-foot Winnebago, unhooking water lines with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. We could have had that conversation at home, with air conditioning and cell service. I pulled out my phone to check. One bar, flickering in and out like a dying heartbeat. Perfect. That's exactly why we're here. The RV park was nearly empty this late in the season. School had started, families had returned to their routines, and the brutal Texas heat was only just beginning to break. Site 46 to our left sat vacant, a concrete pad surrounded by scrub brush and the bent remains of a picnic table. To our right, Site 48 hosted an ancient Airstream trailer that looked like it hadn't moved in years. No signs of life from either direction. Marcus connected the electrical hookup with more force than necessary, the plastic connector clicking against the post. "Remote enough for you?" I ignored the sarcasm and walked to the canyon's edge, maybe 50 feet behind our site. The drop was breathtaking. 800 feet of layered rock falling away into shadows that were already too deep for afternoon light. Down in the canyon floor, the Prairie Dog Town fork of the Red River wound like a brown snake between cottonwoods and salt cedars. The silence was so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. "It's beautiful," I called back to Marcus, but my voice sounded strange, smaller than it should have been. The canyon swallowed it completely. By the time we'd leveled the RV and run through our setup routine, the sun was touching the western rim. Marcus had thawed steaks for the grill, and I'd opened a bottle of wine. The good stuff I'd been saving for when we needed it most. We needed it now, though neither of us would admit why. The miscarriage had been 3 months ago. 12 weeks along, far enough to have told the kids, close enough to the safe zone that we'd let ourselves hope. Close enough that I'd already started thinking about converting Marcus's office into a nursery. The silence between us since then had grown thick and toxic, filled with all the things we couldn't say to each other. "Remember our first camping trip?" I asked as Marcus lit the propane grill. The flame caught with a soft whoosh, blue and honest in the gathering dusk. "That terrible tent at Lake Whitney. It rained for 3 days straight." He smiled for the first time all day. "You cried when the sleeping bags got soaked." I did not cry. I expressed frustration in a totally reasonable way. "You threw your hiking boot at a tree. The tree was being smug. This was better. This was what we'd come here for. The easy rhythm we'd lost somewhere between doctor visits and well-meaning friends who didn't know what to say." I poured wine into our plastic camping cups and handed him one. "To new beginnings," I said, raising my cup. Marcus clinked his against mine, but his smile had already faded. "Sarah, we need to talk about—" That's when we heard it. A voice, distant but clear, echoing up from the canyon floor. "Help me." We both froze, wine cups halfway to our lips. The voice came again, definitely human, definitely in distress. "Please, somebody help me." Marcus set down his wine and moved to the canyon edge. "Hello?" he called down. "Where are you?" The response came immediately. "I'm hurt. I can't move. Please." "We need to call for help," I said, already reaching for my phone. No signal. Not even the single flickering bar from earlier. "Hello?" Marcus shouted again. "Can you tell us where you are exactly?" "Down here, by the river. I fell. I think my leg is broken." The voice was definitely coming from the canyon floor, maybe a quarter-mile downstream from our position. In the failing light, I could see the tops of cottonwood trees, but nothing else. The canyon walls here were too steep and too high to see the bottom clearly. "There's supposed to be a ranger station at the visitor center," I said. "We could drive there, get help." "That's 20 minutes round trip," Marcus replied. "If someone's really hurt down there—" He was right. By the time we drove to the visitor center and got a rescue team organized, it would be full dark. And if the person was seriously injured, 20 minutes could matter. "Help! Please don't leave me!" The desperation in the voice decided it. Marcus went back to the RV and emerged with his heavy-duty flashlight and the first aid kit. "I'm going to find a way down. You stay here with the RV. Try to get a signal. Call for real help if you can." "I'm coming with you." "Sarah, no. It's going to be dangerous in the dark and nothing. We do this together." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression stopped him. Maybe he remembered that I'd been the one to insist on rock climbing lessons during our first year of marriage. Maybe he just knew better than to fight me when I'd made up my mind. We gathered what we needed: flashlights, water, the first aid kit, a blanket. Marcus found a coil of rope in the RV's storage compartment. The voice called up twice more while we prepared, each time sounding weaker, more desperate. The trail down into the canyon started about 100 yards from our campsite, marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, "Lighthouse Trail, 2.7 miles to canyon floor." In daylight, it would be a moderate hike. In darkness, with an injured person waiting, it felt like a descent into the earth itself. Marcus led with the big flashlight, its LED beam cutting through the darkness ahead of us. I followed with a smaller light, trying to keep track of the narrow trail as it switched back down the canyon wall. The silence was complete now except for our breathing and the crunch of gravel under our boots. "Hello," Marcus called out every few minutes. "We're coming. Can you hear us?" No response. "Maybe they passed out," I suggested. though something about the silence bothered me. The voice had been so clear before, echoing up from the canyon with perfect clarity. Now, even our own voices seemed muffled, absorbed by the darkness around us. The trail was steeper than it had looked from above, and more treacherous. Loose rock scattered under our feet, sending small avalanches skittering down into the void. My legs were already burning by the time we'd descended what felt like half the distance, and sweat was soaking through my shirt despite the cool night air. "Sarah," Marcus said, stopping suddenly. "What?" He was playing his light over the trail ahead of us. The beam revealed a section where recent rockfall had partially blocked the path, leaving a narrow gap between fallen boulders and the canyon wall. "We can get through," I said. "That's not what I'm worried about." He moved the light to the left, illuminating the canyon wall. "Look at this." I squeezed up beside him and followed his beam. Carved into the red sandstone, maybe 4 feet above the trail, were symbols, not natural erosion patterns. Deliberate marks cut deep into the rock. They looked old, very old, but the edges were too clean, too precise to be ancient petroglyphs. "What do you think they mean?" I asked. Marcus moved his light along the wall, revealing more symbols. Dozens of them, stretching along the rock face for maybe 20 feet. Some looked like stick figures, others like geometric patterns. And at the far end, larger than the rest and carved deeper, was what looked unmistakably like a human figure with its mouth open wide. "I don't know," Marcus said, "but they look recent, fresh." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "Let's keep moving." We squeezed through the gap in the rockfall and the trail opened up again. But something had changed. The silence felt heavier now, more oppressive. Even our flashlight beams seemed dimmer, as if the darkness was actively pushing back against the light. "Hello?" Marcus called again. "We're almost to the bottom. Can you hear us?" His voice echoed off the canyon walls, distorted and strange. And in the dying echo, I could have sworn I heard something else. A sound like breathing, but too deep, too slow for human lungs. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" I listened, straining my ears against the silence. Nothing. Just the blood rushing in my ears and the distant sound of our feet on rock. We reached the canyon floor 40 minutes after we'd started down. The river was smaller than it had looked from above, maybe 15 feet wide and shallow enough that we could see the rocky bottom in our flashlight beams. Cottonwood trees lined both banks, their leaves rustling in a breeze I couldn't feel. "Which way?" Marcus asked. I tried to remember the direction the voice had come from. "Downstream, I think. Maybe a quarter mile." We followed the river, picking our way carefully over the uneven ground. Our lights revealed a landscape that felt alien, primordial. The canyon walls rose up on both sides like the ribs of some enormous beast, and the stars above were just a thin slice of light between the rock faces. "There," Marcus said, stopping suddenly. His light had caught something on the far bank, a flash of color that didn't belong. We waded across the river, the cold water shocking against our ankles. On the other side, half hidden under a fallen cottonwood branch, was a backpack. Bright blue nylon, modern and expensive looking. Marcus pulled it out and opened it while I held the light. "Water bottle, energy bars, a map," he said, checking the contents. "And this." He held up a wallet. Inside was a driver's license for someone named David Torres, age 26, from Amarillo. The photo showed a young man with dark hair and a friendly smile. "David," I called out. "David Torres, we found your backpack." Nothing. Marcus was examining the ground around where we'd found the pack. "No blood," he said. "No signs of a struggle. It's like he just left it here." That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, barely noticeable under the river scent and the dusty aroma of the canyon, but definitely there. Something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. "Marcus," I said, "I smell it too." We followed the scent upstream, our lights playing over the ground and the low brush. The smell got stronger as we moved, more distinct. Not flowers, I realized. Something else, something that made my stomach clench with instinctive revulsion. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed. His light had found the source. About 50 yards from where we'd discovered the backpack, tucked into a grove of salt cedars, was what remained of David Torres. I've seen plenty of medical shows, read enough crime novels to think I was prepared for something like this. I wasn't. The body was arranged deliberately, precisely, laid out on a flat rock like an offering. But it was wrong, in ways that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. The limbs were too long, stretched impossibly, as if someone had pulled David Torres on a rack until his bones separated. His clothes were intact, but his body underneath had been rearranged. The skull was elongated, the jaw extended, the teeth filed to points. But the most horrible thing was the expression on what remained of his face, pure terror, frozen in the moment of death. I turned away and vomited into the bushes, my wine and dinner coming up in painful heaves. When I could finally breathe again, Marcus had his arm around my shoulders. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Now. This isn't something that could happen naturally." "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone did this. Someone with tools, with time, and they might still be down here." The implications hit me like ice water. The voice calling for help, the fresh symbols carved into the canyon wall, the body arranged like a ritual display. "The voice," I whispered. "It wasn't David." "No," Marcus said grimly. "It wasn't." We started back toward the trail as quickly as we could manage without running. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat now. Every sound of wind through the trees might be footsteps. Our flashlight beams danced wildly as we hurried, creating a disorienting strobe effect that made the landscape shift and jump around us. That's when we heard it again. "Help me. Please. Somebody help me." The same voice coming from somewhere ahead of us on the trail. The same desperate tone, the same inflection. Exactly the same. We both stopped dead. "That's impossible," I said. "Help! I'm hurt! I can't move!" The voice was closer now, maybe 50 yards ahead, right where the trail started its climb back up the canyon wall. Marcus turned off his flashlight and grabbed my arm. "Turn yours off," he whispered. We stood in complete darkness, listening. The voice came again, and in the silence that followed I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Breathing. Deep, slow inhalations that lasted too long, like lungs the size of bellows. "Please don't leave me." And then, barely audible under the pleading words, I heard something else. A sound like laughter, but wrong. Too deep, too knowing. Marcus turned his light back on and pointed it toward the voice. The beam revealed the trail ahead, empty except for rocks and scrub brush. But the laughter continued, echoing off the canyon walls from multiple directions now, as if the sound was being passed back and forth between the rock faces. "Run," Marcus said. We ran. Up the trail, stumbling over loose rock, our lights bouncing wildly ahead of us. Behind us, the laughter grew louder, more distinct, and underneath it, the sound of something large moving through the brush, keeping pace with us. "Help me," the voice called out, now coming from above us on the canyon rim. "I'm hurt." Then from behind us, "Please don't leave me." Then from our left, impossibly, from the sheer canyon wall itself, "Somebody help me." The voice was everywhere now, echoing from every direction, overlapping itself until it became a chorus of pleading that made no sense. How could one voice come from so many places at once? We reached the section of trail with the carved symbols, squeezing through the gap in the rockfall. As we passed the carvings, our flashlight beams illuminated them again, and I saw something that made me stumble. The symbols were moving. Not physically, the rock itself wasn't changing. But the shadows cast by our lights made the carved figures seem to writhe and dance, and the open mouth of the largest figure appeared to be growing wider, as if it was preparing to swallow us whole. "Don't look at them," Marcus gasped, pulling me past the carvings. "Just keep moving." Above us, the pleading voices had stopped. In their place was something worse, the sound of our own voices echoing down from the canyon rim. "Help me!" It was my voice, perfect in every detail. "I'm hurt," Marcus's voice calling out in distress. "Please don't leave me. both our voices together, harmonizing in a way that human vocal cords could never achieve. We climbed faster, our legs burning, our lungs screaming for air. The trail seemed longer now, the switchbacks endless. Every time I thought we were making progress, another turn would reveal more trail stretching up into the darkness. And then, impossibly, we heard the voices again from below us. Our own voices calling up from the canyon floor. "Sarah, Marcus, where are you? We're lost. We need help. Something's wrong down here." Perfect imitations, but the timing was off by just a fraction of a second, like an echo that came too late. "It's trying to get us to go back," Marcus said between gasps. "Don't listen to it." "What is it?" "I don't know. Something that hunts by mimicking voices. Something that's been down there for a long time." We climbed for what felt like hours, though it could only have been 30 or 40 minutes. The voices below us kept calling, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, always in perfect imitations of our own speech patterns. At one point I heard my own voice screaming in agony, a sound so realistic and so horrible that I almost turned back despite everything I knew. Finally, gasping and shaking, we reached the canyon rim. Our RV sat exactly where we'd left it, the propane grill still glowing blue in the darkness. The ordinary sight of it, chrome and fiberglass and LED lights, was so normal, so reassuringly human, that I almost cried with relief. "Get in the RV," Marcus said. "Now." We stumbled across the campsite, fumbling for the door. Behind us, from the canyon below, came one final call in my own voice. "Marcus, Sarah, don't leave me down here alone," and then silence. Inside the RV, Marcus immediately started the engine while I threw our essential belongings into bags. We'd been planning to stay 3 days, but I was ready to drive all night to get away from this place. "Wait," Marcus said as I headed for the door with an armload of clothes. "Listen." From outside came the sound of footsteps on gravel. Slow, measured steps circling our RV, but we were both inside. We were both accounted for. The footsteps stopped at our door. A gentle knock. 3 taps, polite and patient. "Hello?" My own voice, speaking from just outside the door. "Marcus, are you in there? I think I got turned around in the dark." Marcus grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to bruise. We stared at each other in the LED lights of the RV's interior, not breathing. Another knock, more insistent. "It's Sarah. I'm locked out. Can you open the door?" The voice was perfect. If I hadn't been standing right there, I would have believed it was me. The inflection, the slight breathiness I got when I was nervous, even the way I pronounced Marcus's name with the emphasis on the second syllable. Everything was exactly right. "Please, it's cold out here." Marcus reached for the CB radio mounted above the driver's seat, hoping to raise a park ranger or highway patrol. Static filled the RV's speakers, punctuated by bursts of what sounded like voices speaking in reverse. The knocking came again, harder now. "I know you're in there. I can see the lights." And then, in a tone that was still perfectly my voice but carried an undercurrent of something ancient and hungry. "Let me in, Marcus. We need to finish our conversation." That's when I understood. The thing in the canyon wasn't just mimicking voices. It was listening, learning. It had heard us talking by the campfire, absorbed our speech patterns, our relationships, our intimate knowledge of each other. "Drive," I whispered. Marcus threw the RV into gear and we lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel. Through the windshield, our headlights illuminated the empty campsite ahead of us. No sign of whatever had been knocking on our door. But in the side mirror, as we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of something standing in the circle of light cast by our now abandoned campfire. Tall and wrong, with limbs that bent in too many places and a face that was trying very hard to look human but couldn't quite manage it. It waved goodbye with my own gesture, my own mannerisms, and it was smiling with my smile. We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached Amarillo as the sun was coming up. At a truck stop diner, over coffee that tasted like salvation, we tried to make sense of what had happened. "We have to report this," I said. "David Torres is dead. His family needs to know." "And tell them what?" That something in the canyon mimicked voices to lure us down there? That it rearranged his body like a puppet? Marcus was right. Who would believe us? And what proof did we have beyond our own traumatic memories? In the end, we called in an anonymous tip about finding a body in Palo Duro Canyon. The news reported 3 days later that the remains of David Torres, missing for 2 weeks, had been discovered by park rangers. The official cause of death was listed as animal attack, though the article mentioned that the condition of the body had been unusual and that the investigation was ongoing. We never went camping again. But sometimes, late at night in our suburban home with all the lights on and the doors locked, I hear my own voice calling to me from the darkness outside our bedroom window. It knows where we live now. It followed us somehow. Or maybe there are more of them, scattered across the empty places of the world. The voice is always patient, always polite. It tells me it's cold outside, that it needs to come in and warm up. It reminds me of conversations we've never had, promises I've never made. And sometimes, in the small hours of the morning, it sounds so much like me that I have to check the mirror to make sure I'm still here, still myself. Marcus says it's trauma, that the mind creates echoes of terrible experiences. He's probably right. Doctors have words for what we went through, treatments that might help us forget. But I know what I hear in my own voice when it calls to me from outside our windows. I hear hunger that's older than human civilization, and patience that could wait forever for the right moment to be invited in. So we keep the doors locked, and we never answer when it calls. And we try very hard not to listen when it tells us how much it's learned about being human, and how good it's getting at the pretense. Because someday, I'm afraid, it might not need to pretend anymore. Story 5. I'm Marcus, 34. I drove to Kaibab National Forest to be alone, and the forest took that personally. The silence hit me first as I pulled my Winnebago off Highway 67, just south of the North Rim. 3 days into October, the aspens had turned gold, and the ponderosa pines stood sentinel against a sky so